now I'm worried. Now I'm looking over my shoulder.
Right.
What's the thing that's going to be coming around the corner that I least expect because someone's going to try to, get back at me. And that with every meeting kind of has a little bit of feeling of that, and you meet as a leadership team, minimum once a week. Well, 52 opportunities for somebody to stab you in the back is not a great feeling.
Not a great feeling. No. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Rodney Evans, and that guy who is hopefully audible now is Sam Spurlin.
Uh,
So, welcome to Outwork with the Ready, where you have two hosts who both have microphones and an ability to be heard through them, which is how we're going to make a podcast today about modernizing organizations as the future of work meets the present moment.
and as you all know, each episode we turn our attention to one common organizational pattern that we think is worth digging into. We pull it apart like Velcro shoes and then propose solutions for what to do instead.
You said Velcro last week.
No, no,
Yes.
no, no.
Yes, you did.
Damn
You didn't
it.
say shoes, but you said Velcro. I remember because I remember asking you if you liked the sound of Velcro being pulled apart, to which you said, yeah.
We pull it apart like we've done nachos. I'm running out of these, I guess. Apparently, I only
There's
have like
nothing
four
else
things that
you
get
can
pulled
pull
apart.
apart. Here you go. Pull it apart like socks coming out of the laundry that have static cling.
It's not poetic, but it is accurate. So we'll go with it.
Hey man, at least I came up with something. This is your
True.
job. And you brought
True.
something you've already said.
I'm 0 for 3 on my responsibilities for like
Yeah,
the
you're
front
doing a
of this
bad
podcast.
job
So
today.
I'm
Yeah.
flustered. My mic wasn't
Consider
working.
this a pip, a verbal
Damn it.
pip. You're on one.
Luckily, I feel very psychologically safe with you, Rodney.
Perfect. Oh, right. That's what we're talking about today, isn't it?
Sure is. We're demonstrating. We're modeling.
Irony. We don't get enough of that in this podcast, but we will today. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today is psychological safety. This was not planned. But before, maybe to get us back into that territory, let's do a check-in question.
Let's do one. Rodney, tracking question. What's something you really like about your lifestyle right now?
Uh, I mean, I have a really charmed life, to be honest with you. But something that has occurred to me recently is because Ed and I chose not to have children and we have a lot of freedom and we have disposable income, I am really able to be there when my friends have big moments. And the last 2 weekends, I have attended events that I had to fly to, but that were like milestone events in people's
Mhm.
lives who I care about. And I just feel like I enjoy it. I think it's meaningful to people when you can do that for them. I understand that a lot of people are not in a situation where they can do that or where they can do it at back to back weekends. And I just feel very lucky that when people are like, would you come to my thing? I can if I want
Yeah,
to.
that's cool.
Yeah. What about you?
I've been going for walks most mornings for the past like week.
Hell yeah.
Uh, sometimes I have a client project that it has a bunch of early meetings, which
Mhm.
is not the case right now. So I've just found myself in this moment where I can start work at a normal time and I can still get up early and I can just go for a walk. And I live somewhere where that walk can be like in the forest and along a river. So I've been doing that and I feel like it's really helping me. Do I seem more centered to you, Ronnie? More calm, more together?
I mean, based on the first 15 minutes where you're trying to get your mic to work, I'm going to say
No.
no. But also, that was an extraordinary circumstance.
Yeah, and I think I handled it admirably,
You
if I
didn't
do
break
say so
anything.
myself.
So
Sure
that
didn't.
was, you didn't rage out. So that was good. Also, I was going to make a joke about why you're not busy right now. And then I was like, wait, again, psychological safety,
Tough for you.
behave yourself.
This
Oh, it's
this
so
episode is
hard.
actually an intervention,
This is a psych
Rodney.
test.
It's an intervention, and Jack and I brought you here today to say you have to be nicer to me.
Psychological safety has nothing to do with niceness, as we'll learn.
That's a good
Sam,
point.
should we talk about the pattern?
Let's talk about the pattern.
Okay. So here's the pattern we're going to discuss today, y'all. Leadership teams, I mean, any teams, but particularly leadership and executive teams, really require a high trust environment to function. And usually, when that is missing or they're trying to create that high trust environment, they're either doing it one on one or they're doing it like outside of the day to day of their work. And neither of those moves translates back to a group dynamic that feels like it is marked by high trust. And like the dissonance between the safety that they say they want and then their felt sense in the group or in the room actually exacerbates that lack of safety. It makes it worse and it makes them generally a little more paranoid, which often kicks off the cycle anew.
Yeah. All right. So there's like lots of different definitions of psychological safety that people
Yeah,
like to throw around. And you
that's
already
true.
alluded to one of them, which is like, it's not like we're just nice to each other. And I think
No.
I've seen a lot of teams that just equate like, oh, psychological safety means that my team is nice
Yeah.
to me. And what it really is that you feel comfortable in your team to take risks. And you
Yes.
know that you will not be punished reputationally or in any other way if you take a risk and it does not pan out the way that you thought it would. And if you have that condition within your team, there's a lot of research out there, really popularized by Google and Project Aristotle, that that is the kind of number one predictor of a team's effectiveness. And I think people hear that and kind of have twisted and pursued that goal in ways that haven't really worked. But that's what we're talking about with psychological safety. Do you feel safe in your team? And perfect example, you're mean as hell to me right now, but I feel safe because we have good psychological safety here.
Right
And
now,
it's
we
not
need you
about
all the
being
time.
nice, it's about like
Yeah.
how we work together. And yeah, I don't know. Like that's the idea there.
I wonder if we should talk a little bit about what kinds of risks, because it's not like if you or I did something truly boneheaded, there wouldn't
Right.
be repercussions. But like when you talk about risk taking and how that relates to psychological safety, what do you practically mean or see?
I mean, I think it's the sort of risk to speak up kind of against the flow of conversation, to kind of push back against groupthink that you might be perceiving within the team, and feeling like
Mhm.
you can take that step out onto that limb where you are potentially alone and not have that limb break and you fall to your death metaphorically in the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's like the ability to express divergent point of view. Often in groups that I see where psych safety feels quite low, people just don't tell the truth. Like you'll just see a
Yeah.
group of people where 8 out of 10 know exactly what the problem is and 0 out of 10 will speak it into the room because it just does not feel worth it. It feels like the
Yeah.
repercussions might be negative or they might be unpredictable, and so people just prefer the comfort of retreat and silence to actually being like, "Yeah, that's not gonna
Yeah.
work."
Yeah, well, and I think you're pointing to the fact that low psychological safety teams often superficially look like perfectly functioning teams
Yes.
because they're low
Yes.
conflict. Low conflict, like we're easy to just kind of like skate along and nobody's really getting heated about anything. And that is not a sign that we're all on the same page or that we have high
No.
psych safety. It's actually the opposite. Nobody feels like they can have principled disagreement on this team. So it's not worth it. We're all just going to keep our head down, and to an outside observer, like, oh, this team, like they're able to meet functionally. Like nobody's yelling at each other.
Yeah, it
There's very
seems like
little
smooth
tears.
sailing.
They're doing great,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think like in the teams where I have felt the safest psychologically, I also like just to say out loud, like I do struggle sometimes with the word safe because I think people throw it around a lot. Actually, Tanisi and I have had this conversation several times when people are like, I didn't feel safe. And it's like, well, there's a difference between safety and comfort. I am
Yeah.
not talking about feeling comfortable. I am talking about feeling like you can behave without there being like financial or emotional or other types of material consequences. Like discomfort is inherent in conflict for most people. So like if you're feeling uncomfortable, that does not necessarily mean that you are feeling unsafe or that you are unsafe. And I think it's important that people understand the difference because
Yeah.
There is one, and it's significant, and if none of us ever behaved in a way that made us uncomfortable, we would not make a lot of progress in this life or this work. But I was gonna say in and maybe to tie these points together, in groups where I think I have had the highest degree of psychological safety, I have been most able to be uncomfortable. I have been most able to, like, sit with my discomfort at disrupting the harmony or openly disagreeing or pointing out something that I knew was not going to be well received or was not going to be easy. And I've experienced that with other people too, who are kind of like, "Hey, I got to tell you, this is like a emperor with no clothes situation. Uh-oh," and I think that's what psychological safety really means. It's the ability, not to have that sort of surface harmony, but to, for as a group, do uncomfortable and hard things, as individuals in a collective.
Yeah, and I think at the end of those experiences in a psychologically safe group, that discomfort feels worth it. Uh,
Totally.
in that you've probably come out the other side, if not strengthened, at least not harmed
Yeah.
in our relationships. Whereas the same disagreement, the same topic of conversation in a very psychologically unsafe group, you have like you leave that feeling like like, I don't know why we even bothered, or like
Yeah.
I'm worried. Now I'm looking over my shoulder.
Right.
What's the thing that's going to be coming around the corner that I least expect because someone's going to try to, get back at me. And that with every meeting kind of has a little bit of feeling of that, and you meet as a leadership team, minimum once a week. Well, 52 opportunities for somebody to stab you in the back is not a great feeling.
Not a great feeling. No. So why do you think this is so persistent or prevalent in leadership teams? Cuz I do see it more there, a lack of psych safety and a desire, both a lack and a
Yeah.
desire, at that altitude than a lot of just like working teams.
That's a great question. I mean, one place where my head goes to is that I think in a kind of typically hierarchical organization, there's obviously more and more power the further up you go in an organization. So I think everything feels higher stakes and probably actually
And
is
is
higher
it
stakes.
often. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when stakes feel high, everything is can be heightened. Just like the emotions that we bring to things, the expectations for getting things right, rightfully, and also I think but it can be detrimental as well. So I think that's an aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think, we talked about this on another episode, that was about wanting leaders to really be org designers. I think often the lack of shared work on a leadership team really exacerbates the lack of safety. And in fact, I was in a like first call with someone the other day, who's on an executive team of a company, and they've had several new members join. And I was talking about this very concept, that there was a desire at their offsite to be doing work around psychological safety, and I sort of was like, you don't really do it at the offsite. Like, the way that you're going to get to increase safety is by working together and like developing trust and an ability to disagree and an ability um to 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 maintain your connection even as hard things unfold. That happens in the work. And this person, to her credit, like instantly was like, yeah, actually I do feel like I trust this person the most of the new people, but I've been working the closest with them one on one for the longest, and maybe that's where
Yeah,
that comes from. And I'm like, yes, and that often doesn't happen among the leadership team as a group.
yeah,
There's usually not that much that that team is doing truly as a multiplayer sport where you get the reps of trusting
yeah,
people and where the
yeah,
psych safety just builds over time and experience.
yeah. And when you don't have that, all you really have is the functional or departmental or whatever kind of organization you lead, the points where they intersect with everybody else's function
Yep.
or team. So, you know, marketing and product, often have disagreements around, how things are supposed to go. If the head of marketing and the head of product don't actually have any shared work together, their really only interactions are these like high emotion, conflict ridden, kind of zero sum sorts of games. And those are not, you can have those conversations in a way that builds psychological safety, but it's not the default in most of the time.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think to that point, like, I often think in leadership teams, there's a sense of like, well, there's the CEO and then there's her direct reports, and those people are peers. But like, there are often a lot of other power dynamics at play in the C suite. And certainly I see and hear a lot about like, sort of like soft power versus hard power in these organizations. And it's usually tied to money. And there's often a perception that like the chief revenue officer and the chief financial officer are really the leaders among peers because they are the closest to the money
Yeah.
in and the money out, and that the chief people officer, the chief technology officer, et cetera, are more like have soft power. I think for what it's worth, I think this is total bullshit. But and like I think it's a very reductive way of thinking about how work gets done, and basically is like setting you up for a bunch of really useless politics and distraction. But I do think that those dynamics exist in leadership teams, and create a kind of competition that makes the building of psych safety harder. So if
Yeah.
I'm the CPO and I know, even though it is said that the CFO and I are peers, in our comp, in our authority, in the our airtime, I have the felt sense that we are not peers. Then my ability to take risk with that person is different, and it's worse when it's unclarified. It's worse when I just have the sense that they actually have more power than I do, but
Right.
no one will say it out loud.
Right. Right. So is it just, do you think a major step in the right direction is just like, how do you have that conversation and to like put that stuff on the table?
I think you have to.
Yeah.
I think you have to. And this is where like, it's not that easy to do, but I had a conversation really recently with someone where I felt like I was being given advice that I did not ask for and I was not interested in. And I was like, I clarified the role and how my role thinks about that body of work, and basically was like, I will pull advice in this domain when I want it. And I think like that was not an easy conversation and it was not a pleasant conversation, but the alternative is that person feeling like she is trying to make her opinion heard and I am just not listening to it. And
Mhm.
she's, to your point, she's putting herself on out on a limb and she's crashing to the ground every time. And so rather than just letting that happen, and this was not a member of Source, this is a different situation, but like rather than letting that happen, I was just like, here's what's going on here. Like, you think your role is this. I think your role is this. Uh, that's why. That's why. She, my guess is, entered that conversation feeling like there was just a lack of safety. And I'm like, no, there's a lack of clarity here about authority. And like,
Mhm.
the truth is, in this situation, and I think this is true of a lot of leadership teams, in this situation, I'm like, I am ultimately responsible for this domain and for whatever comes of it. And so, like you continuing to try to like exert your opinion is not useful or helpful, and you're not going to live with the results. So, like,
Yeah.
I kind of have to do it. I kind of have to trust my own judgment here because it is a high risk situation and I am on the hook for what happens as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes
And, like,
sense.
those things just leadership teams just don't talk about that shit. They just do not talk
Right.
about that shit, and so then everybody in the room makes up their own stories about, like, who they can trust and who has their back and who actually has power and who the CEO listens to, and blah, who like the favored son is, etc. And all of that makes the development of psych safety and the ability to have risk taking in a group really hard.
Yeah, and what it makes me better understand hearing you describe it that way is why so much of the work that we will often do with leadership teams has an end result of greater psychological safety, and we never actually say the
We don't
words
go after it.
psychologically safe or
That's right.
psychological safety. And that's one of the aspects of this pattern that I've found so fascinating is that psychological safety is on the tip of the tongue of every team, every leader that I've worked with. I've never worked in an organization where they're like, "Hmm, tell me about this word psychological safety." Everybody thinks they know what it is, and everybody's very happy to talk
Yes.
about it. And there's a very big difference between talking about psychological safety or espousing that you believe it is important and actually doing things that create psychological safety.
Yeah. I really like that. Uh and it is true. It's one of the reasons that like even though I have very mixed feelings about the practice of team chartering in terms of facilitating it and also participating in it. Um, I often find that I have to do it with C-suites. And it often is like has outsized impact for the exact reason that you're saying. Because it's like what they need is higher trust, but the prereq to that is clarity, which they don't have because they've never had a clarifying or explicit conversation about roles, about authority, about accountability, and even like, and this is something that we're getting to at source but haven't done before, even like in an executive team, are you really holding two roles? Are you holding a role that is like your functional representation, like I'm the chief revenue officer? And then is there a different role that is just about like being on this team that has different responsibilities and different authority? Usually. Like we've
Like a
sort of
default
come.
member role.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
we've sort of come to the conclusion that like being a member of source requires a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with your domain.
yeah,
And I say this just because often in leadership teams, the day of the year that it takes to clear this shit up is not a day that they invest. And I've coached leadership teams I'll see in a Google Doc that come back to their team charter that I made with them 6 years ago
yeah,
annually. Like,
yeah,
I'll get a notification that's like, "Blah, blah has updated their decision rights," and I'm like, "Good for them." I haven't heard from those people in 10 years, but, like,
yeah.
good on them that they're still getting after it. It's these very, to your point, it's these very non-psych safety related ways of working that over time actually produce psych safety.
Yeah, and the conversation around psychological safety that I have a hard time seeing in organizations is that you'll have an executive team talking about valuing psychological safety within the organization. So I'm not talking about their team right now, but we want to be a psychologically safe environment. We want your teams to be psychologically safe. We want risk takers. And then people look at that executive team and see zero psychological safety actually
Yeah.
being modeled. So like in that default member, executive team member role, I think there is something around you are modeling, setting the tone for like how we do this thing here. So you can't
Yeah.
be talking out of one side of your mouth about psychological safety being important and then have legendarily bad meetings as an executive team where people are regularly screaming at each other and like
Yeah.
try to square that circle because people see through that so transparently.
It's so obvious. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I am curious because you've worked around a lot of executive teams. Like, what are some of the typical patterns around this that you see? Obviously, you brought up this topic because you hear a strong desire for it. What kinds of things really tangibly do you see go wrong?
With the team trying to develop psychological
Yeah.
safety. I mean, I think the main one is like trying to directly come at it, which I give people
Mm,
like total credit. Like that's the obvious thing. Like, okay, we want to be more psychologically safe. So let's let's do that. Like let's do something to directly get
What
after
do they
that.
try to do?
I mean, it's like the team building stuff,
Uh-huh, team
right?
building.
Like
Yeah,
we're gonna do a ropes
trust falls.
course,
Yeah.
and then at the end we'll be more
Ropes
psychologically
course.
safe.
Yeah.
I've never actually done a ropes course. They
I
look like
haven't
a lot of
either. It's
fun.
such a good, like, little meme for that
Yeah,
kind of thing, but I've never or maybe I did when I was in 5th grade, but I have not done one professionally,
yeah.
which I
Well,
should.
and like I of course I'm using it as like a punchline, but I do think doing things outside of work together in a different non-work context can certainly help. Like it's not it can hurt too if you do it poorly, but like it's maybe better than nothing. But to your point earlier, like let's do some real work together that actually matters. That's not side of desk for both of us, and we're trying to like just make time to do it. Something that really matters that we have to work together on, and like be mindful of how we are actually working together. So yeah, let's do a little bit of a mini charter. Let's get into a good rhythm. Let's maybe have a coach working with us, often the role that we play in these sorts of teams. And the end result is often greater psychological safety. But I think it's one of those things that like if you go directly at it, it has a way of kind of slipping through your fingers because you're almost like trying too hard when really you
Yeah.
should be trying to take care of the other things around it, and it
Yeah.
will kind of grow on its own, which is a unsatisfying answer for a bunch of type A folks who just want to be like, well, just give me the
Just give
checklist.
me a
We'll do the
plans to
checklist.
do
Yeah,
to make safety come out the other side.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I think where this goes sideways a lot is where the leader, the one with more juice among peers, where they can't be pinned down, this is really hard. So I've worked with many executive teams where the the CEO leader, and I did a lot of this work before I joined the Ready when I was on my own, where the leader was like, I really want trust and safety and risk taking, and I want like a meritocracy, and I want productive conflict, and I want all of these things in my leadership team, and I'm just not getting them. And they themselves are unwilling to be contained or
right.
constrained in any way. And so when it's like, okay, cool. Well, let's start with you. What are the things that you need to weigh in on and give advice on? What are the decisions that you need to hold in your role?
Right.
Everything that you don't clarify and like grab for yourself is gonna not be yours. And they're like, I don't think that's it. Like, where we're
Yeah,
like, okay, well, like, let's make some working agreements with the team that you are really going to like hold the group to and be a model of. And they're like, well, I mean, that seems a little like overly, they'll like throw like bureaucracy at me. They're like, that seems overly bureaucratic. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. You just don't want to publish the rules by which other
yeah,
people can play. But like if you're unwilling, and look, as a person who sits in a role like that, it's fucking hard. Like, of course, there are days that really annoying stuff happens. And what I want to do is turn to one of my friends at the ready and talk about it. But I
yeah,
don't, because it would be really shitty to my
yeah,
team if I spoke about them out of school to other people at the ready.
yeah,
So I don't. I have a
yeah,
professional coach and I pay him and I talk to him when I am frustrated about things that are happening. And it's like, I say that as an example because it is human nature to not
yeah,
want to be constrained and to be able to um, be reactive or be in your feelings or not adhere to agreements or claw back a decision because you see somebody doing something stupid. Like these are very human tendencies. But if you, as the leader who is trying to create safety, if you can't play by the rules that are required for that safety, you don't have a shot.
yeah, yeah. And the flip side of that, I think, is that this is one of those things where one person taking this very seriously and willing to kind of take that first step and to show up differently, to respond to the way things are going differently, to be publicly vulnerable about things can be that first tip into the team starting to organize itself a little bit differently and showing up a little bit differently. I mean, I think people are always talking about, the role of leaders and leadership. Like if you are a leader and you want a place to practice some leadership, be commit to being the catalyst of creating psychological safety in the teams that you are on. I think we'll kind of shift into talking about ways to do that in a moment. But to me, that's actually exciting. There's actually there are things in organizations where the idea of being an individual and doing something differently is like a drop in the bucket. Like, yes, like we did the whole episode on the mundane. I love individual effort for changing systems. I think if we completely throw away individual effort, then like what are we doing as humans and like why even try? And also can acknowledge the fact that when you're dealing with massive systems, individual effort, uncoordinated individual effort is often not enough to actually change those systems. But this
Yeah.
is one of those things when we're talking at the team level of changing how we show up and how it feels to be a member of that team. And if you have positional power in that team, you can take a major step in that direction. And things can start to shift, I think, quite quickly for a team when someone is willing to take those first steps.
I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. And I think that a lot of the moves that a leader has to make, and I especially would say for like a leader at the top of the house or the top of a function who's taking over a team that inevitably has like scar tissue from things that have happened in the past. When you're inheriting a team that is like dysfunctional and not trusting and unsafe and where there's a lot of like performative congeniality, um you have got to overdo it with the moves at the beginning. And like
Yeah,
I have worked with leaders where I'm like, allow anonymity in dissent. Like, you have to publicly really show that you are encouraging divergent thinking and expressing opinions that may be unpopular and questioning beliefs that the group maybe has held true. And like, you have to overdo it, I think, a little bit, especially at the beginning when you're trying to establish the vibe, so that people don't feel like they're going to accidentally hit a tripwire, because a lot of us have in our careers. Like, a lot of us were cruising along, and then the first time we opened our mouths to say something controversial, um like, we had the lived experience of like, "Oh, I thought that I had psychological safety here, and it turns out I did not. I just
yeah,
wasn't testing the boundaries."
yeah. Yeah, no, totally. And the person who gets shut down in that situation carries that scar with them potentially forever.
Yeah,
And the person who did the shutting down probably forgot they did it by the time they left the meeting. So there's a
100%.
huge difference in the felt impact of how something like that goes down.
Yeah. And for the people out there who are like, to Sam's point, for the people who have done the shutting down, and look, I'm sure I've been one of these people at times. I do not recuse myself, but like,
Did it at the beginning of this episode.
oh, stop it. It's a I'm like, "Wait, was that one again?" You can get me an electric collar. Like, I can think of an example of this when I was on a team and a person with more power and authority and position than me absolutely, like, shut me down in, like, the most brutal way. I'm sure he never thought about it again.
Right.
I will hate that guy to my grave, and when people mention him to me to this day, I'm like,
Yeah.
"That guy's an asshole."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, lest you think that these are throwaway moments, like, there are a lot of people out there who do not feel that way just because, like, you were
Yeah.
having an off day and you didn't control your reaction and you were hangry and you were a bit of a dick. Like, know that if you don't clean up after yourself in those moments, um, there
Yeah.
are people who remember.
Yeah. is, that sounded like a tagline to a horror movie.
Yeah, I am a haunted house of a coworker. I will
Oh,
pop out at you but it's like, to
yeah,
your point, like, I'm sure that person was just like, "Whatever, she's tough, she can take it," and I'm just like,
yeah,
"You're dead to me."
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so don't do that shit, especially if you have power. And look, if you fuck this up, and we all do fuck it up, and and you speak out of turn, or you shut somebody down, or you don't have the regulation to really listen and be in your discomfort, which is what this is about. Clean your shit up afterwards. Go back to that
yeah,
person and be like, ideally in front of the group, and be like, I should not have interrupted you. I should not have shut you down like that. I asked for your opinion, then I didn't listen to it. That was on me. I will do better next
yeah,
time. Like, you got to
yeah,
do that work, because otherwise you are signaling to the whole group that they are better served by like keeping their mouths shut and their heads down.
totally. So we shift fully into just our kind of grab bag of other ideas
Grab
around
bag.
this.
Yeah, before
So
we
we
do,
do the
leave us a
review
review.
request. Okay. Oh, that
I
was that
just
it.
did it.
That was me talking over you. Do it again.
Yeah.
Do it again. I'll be quiet this time.
Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much.
So swift. So to the point. Love it.
I'm Swift. What can
Uh,
I say?
can I go first?
Yeah, man.
All right. This is in the same ballpark of what we've already been talking about. So I think one way, so we're talking about like ways that a team can start to build greater psychological safety. You as a leader on that team, I think something that can help quite a bit is if that the team has is it has shared expectations around what their growth edges are and what they're basically publicly working on. So
Yeah,
normalizing the idea up front that everybody on this team is not a perfect human being and we all have things that we are trying to get better at, and
of
let's all be
course.
aware of each other's thing and actually try to help each other on that. We can immediately just kind of break this facade of perfection that often kind of lingers around an executive team and just lean into the fact that we're all trying to get better at things. We're all imperfect. And let's just be open about that.
I think that's really smart. A couple of people on Source have done that lately. Just been like, this is really something that I'm working on. And it's been like
Yeah.
very powerful, I think, for the rest of us to be like, how can we help you? You know?
Yeah. And I think that's an aspect of our kind of new summative feedback process that works really well
That's
is
where it
that
came
it's
up.
not, it's, yeah, exactly. It's not just like our summative feedback process, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but it's not just like show up and like have people throw things at you. It's like
Yeah.
the person seeking feedback first articulates, like, here's what I think, here's what I'm working on, here's what I think I need feedback on. And of course, as the feedback giver, we are not restricted to only those things, but it is helpful for me to know what a person is working on and get a sense of like where their own self-awareness is around stuff.
Yeah. And to tie this to psychological safety, knowing that somebody's edge is probably a place where they're taking less risk, but probably need to be taking some risk in order to learn, is
Mhm.
really valuable in a team. When somebody's
Yeah,
like, I don't think to ask for help regularly because of my own shit and I'm working on it. It's like, well, then you probably need to do that in order,
yeah,
you get it.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to talk about aims. So, this has been probably the biggest shift in my own leadership thinking in the last 6 months. I think for the last couple of years or longer, the Ready has been in a state of pendulum swinging between what I call chaotic individualism and collective orientation. And I was really never particularly comfortable with either side, actually. Wherever the pendulum was swinging, I was like, this side feels mercenary and this side feels paternalistic, and I don't like either one of them. Neither of them culturally felt right to me. And my
Mhm.
third way out of this, that like when it clicked, I was like, this is the way, is like It's not about the person, it's not about the membership, it's about what we are trying to do as a company, what our aim is as a company. And I say this because when we start to really understand our aims, and we still have work to do around this, when we start to understand our aims and we start to prioritize things, first of all, it's a lot easier for us to do work together because everyone isn't protecting their fiefdom or their existing pile of work or their reason for existing. They now understand that, like, the aim that we have agreed to, the aim that we have designed, it does supersede the other shit that we have created for ourselves. And it gives us ways to do shared work. It gives us something important to do together that, like, really helps us create psychological safety, and it gets us out of the interpersonal, frankly.
Mhm.
And I think this is a great place to, especially for a leadership team that's doing the thing of like, we need to build trust over here and we need to execute over here. I'm like, stop and figure out what you are trying to do as a group and use that as the lever for developing psychological safety. So if our aim is to grow through acquisition next year by 50%, okay, great. What are the risks and divergent perspectives and different, more candid, more difficult conversations we're going to need to have as a group to really get after that? Like, I just think that's a useful lever point, that gets us out of the like ropes course or the sort of like performative harmony thing.
Right. Yeah, I like that a lot, and I'm so is it a matter of the aim gives us something to, like, put our individual effort aside in the service of something larger, right? Is that how you're kind of thinking of it?
I think it gives us a place to direct our individual effort
Mm,
and
mhm.
to cultivate psychological safety through the experience of pursuing this aim together, so that it's not just like Sam being like, Rodney is always mean to me and she doesn't want to hear my ideas, and me being like, Sam, that's true, shut up. Instead, it's like, what are we trying to do with this podcast? And
Yeah,
do your ideas serve that? Does my criticism serve that? Or
yeah,
it gets us out of like just the dynamic and into what we are trying to do together, which is both our playground for cultivating psychological safety and, importantly, the place where we probably need to take risks and be
yeah.
uncomfortable if we're going to do a hard thing together.
Yeah, what I like what you're describing there is you're talking about, like, once we have aims, how we use them to build psychological safety and actually do them. But I think also the way in which we develop the aims that we
Yes,
consent to, or even if it's not a consent decision, maybe it is like your call or some other decision making method. There's still there's probably ways to get after or to create those aims in a way that builds psychological safety as well.
I agree. And even if we use, since I started with making fun of you, even if we use the podcast as an example, like, I feel like you and I and Jack, in trying to figure out what our aims are, have developed a level of safety that we wouldn't have had just by making this show.
Right.
Like, the
Right.
3
And
of
yeah.
us digging
Yeah.
into, like, what are we
Right.
doing here? What are we
Right.
trying to do with this thing? Like, that
Totally.
is a different kind of, that requires a different level of vulnerability, a different level of candor, like, a different level of depth in conversation than just, like, what topic should we hit next week?
Right. And it makes me think about our weekly meeting where we talk about the podcast. What we don't have, the way that meeting is not run is like we stare at our numbers and we rack our brains about how we make these go up. How we make these go
Yeah,
up. And we just like argue, like really hyper focus on that. Like we are having conversations about, like, what is it about our podcast that people are telling us that they actually enjoy? Like our dynamic, the fact that we are, or we're a quote unquote professional podcast, and yet the F bomb apparently shows up sometimes. Not saying
I
everybody
know,
loves every
never heard
aspect
of
of
it.
it, but we're
Mhm.
having conversations about what we're actually trying to do and not just looking at the kind of quantitative output that you might expect is the indicator of whether or not a podcast is successful.
Exactly. And I think, like, just one click further and then I'll leave the podcast thing alone. Like, through those conversations, some of which are uncomfortable because it's like we invest our time, you and I prioritize this over a lot of other competing commitments, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, I think we've done really good investigation of like, do we care about actually growing as a show? Or because we have the kind of listeners that we do who like listen for a long time and stay with us and interact with us in other places, like, do we just like, be
Yeah.
psyched about that and do what they want us to do. Like, these are the
Yeah.
kinds of conversation and that requires safety. That
Yeah.
that requires psychological safety to go like, what do you want out of this? What do I want out of this? What is this doing for the ready? What is this doing for the listeners? Which of those things is most important and which are we going to sacrifice? Like these conversations require safety, but even in trying to choose the aim, we start to like understand each other's perspectives and vulnerabilities in a different way.
Totally. I don't want to do another one, but I feel compelled to say one last thing, and maybe if it's not
Go.
useful, Jack will cut it out. Um, Psychological safety is not a binary. It's not yes or no. We either
Mm,
got it or we don't. Like with most complex things, it is a continuum. And the most psychologically safe teams could probably even become more psychologically safe. Even really non-psychologically safe teams will be benefited by moving slightly in a more psychologically safe direction. So I don't think it helps anybody to conceptualize it as like we either got it or we don't.
right.
Yeah, you can make progress. It's one of those things that making consistent progress over time and check-in rounds actually creates the situation that you want to be in.
Nice.
All right, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. So, we're always looking for new topics for the show. And if you have an organizational pattern that you're having trouble changing, shoot us a note at podcast@theready.com. This show is engineered by Taylor Marvin and produced by Jack Van Amberg. At Work with the Ready is created by the Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Thanks for listening.
To like understand each other's perspectives and vulnerabilities in a different way.
Totally. I don't want to do another one, but I feel compelled to say one last thing, and maybe if it's
Go.
not useful, Jack will cut it out. Um, Psychological safety is not a binary. It's not yes or no. We either
Mm,
got it or we don't. Like with most complex things, it is a continuum. And the most psychologically safe teams could probably even become more psychologically safe. Even really non-psychologically safe teams will be benefited by moving slightly in a more psychologically safe direction. So I don't think it helps anybody to conceptualize it as like we either got it or we don't.
right.
Yeah, you can make progress. It's one of those things that making consistent progress over time and check-in rounds actually creates the situation that you want to be in.
Nice.
All right, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. So, we're always looking for new topics for the show. And if you have an organizational pattern that you're having trouble changing, shoot us a note at podcast@theready.com. This show is engineered by Taylor Marvin and produced by Jack Van Amberg. At Work with the Ready is created by the Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Thanks for listening.